I go to Ohio, right? And I go to a jam session, I just play with them. Without any rehearsal, we just go in and play. And so the reason that works is because there's a shared language that everybody understands from the common recordings and the other kinds of conventions like that, from our teachers, which passed down, right? And it's in some ways, it's very similar to, like how do you stay rooted when you have a conversation with someone you've never met? Well, we kind of share the same language, right? And we sometimes have shared experiences, and we oftentimes have to kind of figure out what we know and we don't know. And then we can start talking about, expanding on things that we kind of have common ground on.
What fuels a multi-passionate life? I'm Jessica Wan, and in this podcast, I interview people who straddle two completely different worlds. I call them Ampersands. And we are collectively designing the Ampersand Manifesto. I'm excited to be speaking with Charles Chen, software engineer, jazz pianist, and magician. As a pianist, Charles has performed in top venues such as Yoshi's and the San Jose Jazz Festival, and he won first place at the 2019 Jazz Search West competition. His debut album, Charles Play, was released in January 2024. Outside of music, Charles performs magic and works as a software engineer. In his engineering life, he's collaborated on features in Google Search and Microsoft Outlook that have impacted millions of people. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
We've known each other for a few years now, but I don't think we've ever talked about how we grew up. When you think about your childhood, how did these pursuits of music, magic, and coding show up from an early age?
Some of the earliest memories I've had was doing music stuff. I was 6-year-old, and we grew up in a relatively poor household, but I had a bunch of friends who had musical instruments. And I kept bugging my mom to get me an electric keyboard for a long time. So she finally got me one. And then I just tinkered around it. I started playing with all the demo sounds and so on. And we finally convinced someone to give us lessons for pretty cheap. And from then on, music was a really big part of my life. I was basically always humming in class and people telling me to shut up. I was constantly trying to show my friends, hey, look at this song I wrote, and nobody seemed to care as much as I did. But it was fine. I really enjoyed doing that stuff. Magic was another thing that I was really into as a kid, but I actually didn't really get seriously into it until after work. After college, where I met with some local magicians at there's a magic meetup that happens every month in San Jose, and I went there and I met with some people around my age, and then they showed me all these kinds of stuff. They took me to a magic convention in Ohio where some of the top magicians in the world go there to lecture and kind of trade secrets and stuff. So sorry, that had nothing to do with childhood. That's me, I guess, my past, but I was always enamored by magic as a kid. I went to Vegas. I stayed to watch all the shows. I watched the magicians go around the restaurants doing tricks, and I followed that magician around until I could figure out what he was doing. And he got really mad at me about that. Coding was also kind of a late start thing too. I was a pre-med when I was in college. I didn't know how to code until I was a junior in college. And then I took 61A, which I know your husband teaches the current incarnation of it now. Back then it was Brian Harvey. My friends convinced me to switch over to do CS as a career and as a degree. So that's what I did starting from then on. I've had a lot of experience with the abstract thinking because I also studied a lot of math in college. So I ended up double majoring in computer science and math. But that kind of the abstract thinking and building structures, the theoretical structures really helped me with computer science. I've always really liked theory in general and building worlds. I read Lord of the Rings when I was in middle school. I love fantasy books. I love just the idea of like magic structures and so on. And I think in some ways, like all three of these pursuits are kind of related. In a lot of ways, you're like building something from nothing. It's a very abstract thing. You're kind of like, in some ways, casting spells to like build like one thing based on something else that people have built in the past, which I really like. So that's kind of like the overarching theme of everything in my life that I like, I guess. So I guess to tie a knot around all this, basically in all three things, I really like, just like big ideas and kind of combining them into something that's cool and like people find appealing.
Jazz music is definitely one form of world building. How did you get deeper into jazz from that kid who picked up a keyboard?
Yeah. I always liked, the old Fantasia movie with
Mickey and Donald.
Yeah. And then there's also the newer Fantasia movie, Fantasia 2000, where they had Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. That was like one of my favorite pieces in the repertoire. I used to listen to that all the time. And there was just something really alluring about improvisation that I didn't quite understand yet as a kid, but I knew that I always wanted to learn. And so I finally had a chance to in high school. I did a jazz class in my junior and senior year. And from there, I went to the Stanford Jazz Workshop, which is a summer program, in Stanford. And I learned from some of the top musicians in the country. And then I went to college. I went to UC Berkeley, and I did the combos there with some of the top musicians in the area, like teaching. And from then on out, like I started getting gigs in the Bay Area, and that's how it just kind of grew as a musician.
I love the journey to the world of jazz and collaborating. As a classically trained musician myself, I'll admit I've always found jazz to be both thrilling and also a bit intimidating because there are a lot of unknowns with improvisation, and there's a lot of variables when you collaborate with other people who are also doing improvisation. How do you stay rooted amidst these unknowns?
Right. So the kind of jazz that I play is like pretty well established. There's a lot of conventional norms that happen. Like everybody has the same kind of repertoire. Like they know the same kinds of songs. They basically have like the same kind of listen to the same kind of recordings. Kind of understand like the same kind of intros and outros that are pretty stock that everybody understands. And so honestly, I've done this many times where I just like go to another city I've never been to. I'm traveling, I go to Ohio, right? And I go to a jam session. I just play with them without any rehearsal. We just go in and play. And so the reason that works is because there's a shared language that everybody understands from the common recordings and the other kinds of conventions like that, from our teachers, like which passed down, right? And it's in some ways it's very similar to like how do you stay rooted when you have a conversation with someone you've never met? Well, we kind of share the same language, right? And we sometimes have shared experiences, and we oftentimes have to kind of figure out what we know and we don't know, and then we can start talking about expanding on things that we kind of have common ground on.
I love that. How do you have a conversation with somebody that you've never met? I think of what are the connection points? What are the commonalities? Your debut album came out in January 2024. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It is so dynamic. It's at times fun and vivacious, as well as sensitive and tender. This morning I was listening to the track, These Foolish Things, and your playing just really moved me. What do you hope people will gain from listening to your album?
I hope that it's accessible enough that people who don't know anything about jazz, like you said, jazz, you feel like jazz is intimidating. I think a lot of people feel like that when they listen. They just try to start listening to jazz, not even performing it. And so part of it is I want it to be accessible. And I also want it to be kind of like a wide variety of the jazz that I like. In this case, I think the term nowadays is just called straight ahead jazz, and that's just like kind of like a mix of like traditional and modern aspects of jazz. Yeah. And so I hope that people will enjoy my music and treat it as a gateway to enjoying other music of the same vein.
In your album, you collaborate with some of the esteemed artists that you mentioned already, like Ralph Moore on saxophone, Peter Washington on bass, Kenny Washington on drums. What was it like to record this album with some of your favorite musicians?
Yeah, it's crazy. I have like dozens, if not hundreds of records to have them on the band. And, they've been playing for, I don't know, like 50 years, 60 years. And they still sound like the records, if not better. And it was really intimidating to do it at first, right? It's like, imagine seeing them with Pavarotti or somebody like that. It'd be like crazy, right? It's like you only see this person on magazines and suddenly see them in real life, and they are in some ways larger than you thought they would be. Not in terms of size, but in terms of like energy or spirit. And the other thing that was really surprising was they were all really generous. I always got the impression that a lot of the old legends were, kind of like crusty and like didn't really want to help. But they were super generous. They were like, maybe we should try doing it this way because this is something we haven't done yet in the recording session. Or they would just give out ideas, throw out ideas, and some of the ideas stuck, some of them didn't. But in the end, like they were still. It was really fun. It was like playing a game with them. It was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Let's take a moment to reflect on this question. Who's a generous mentor in your life? Outside of hosting this podcast, I partner with leaders in the workplace to turn professional challenges into leadership successes and career progression. I love working with executive leaders, aspiring C-suite professionals, and of course, ampersands. If any of this sounds interesting to you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. That's JESSICAWAN.com. Now, back to the show. Take us a little bit behind the scenes of producing this album and also the preparation to produce this album. What did your days kind of look like?
So Kenny, the drummer, he's actually notorious for being like a real perfectionist, and he wanted me to write out all the music for him half a year before the recording date. Yeah, and that's not normal because normally people just do it like the month of or something. But I did it. I wrote a song like every week or something, and then I picked the ones that I liked and I gave it to him. So technically, we recorded the album in 2023, so I was preparing for 2022. And so I did a lot of writing, and it was really frustrating because of the pressure of it being my first album. I wanted the songs to be good. So I kept tossing like, oh my God, I think I wrote like hundreds of songs. I think I wrote I wrote like 100 songs.
Wow.
And I think we only kept like 4 or something. And it's because, not all the songs were completely finished, but I just said, scrap it. I'm just going to move on. And so that was definitely really time consuming and tough and very mentally draining. In terms of like piano part, that part wasn't a problem to me because it was a known entity. Like I knew how to practice for gigs. And so I basically treated this as like a really fancy gig. So that was good. Except the day before, I flew to New York because we recorded in New York. I couldn't sleep at all. So I walked into the studio like pretty sleep deprived, and it was pretty rough. But I managed to get through it, and I think it sounded okay.
It sounded great. Beyond music, you've also performed magic. What similarities do you find between performing magic and performing music?
So let's just talk about magic first, and I'll tell you what the similarities is. So the way magic works is the magician is doing something, some sort of incredible feat to the audience, like either cutting a lady in half, or making someone float, or finding their card, or whatever. The audience doesn't know how any of it works, but they're impressed with the end result because it's something that's either really cool, or or very touching, or like life changing or something. And I think a lot of that is in jazz too, because there's a lot of hidden work that goes into being able to improvise and being able to play in this idiom that is not well known unless you are trained in jazz. Like improvisation isn't just you play random notes and it works. It's there is still a system involved, because basically you're just composing on the spot. And so in that way, that is one similarity, is there is a lot of preparation and a lot of hard work that goes unknown to the audience. And we kind of only see the final result as the audience member. The other thing I talked about earlier was like this idea of world building, right? In magic, who's a good example of this? David Blaine. He does all these tricks, but it's kind of because he's like a shaman, right? He's able to, like be underwater for longer than 10 minutes. He can swallow frogs. He can catch a bullet with his teeth, and he's kind of like this. And all of these stories or tall tales about him kind of contribute to his persona, basically. And so I think jazz in a way is kind of the same, because the kind of music that you like is a reflection of who you are, and the kind of music that you play is going to be hopefully the music that you like. And so I think in that way, that's another similarity, and that's kind of like a broader, like all art's kind of like this similarity.
How would you describe your persona as a magician?
As a magician, it's the same as my persona as a musician. I think I'm a pretty silly person that kind of follows the rules sometimes, makes bad puns, and then breaks the rules occasionally, and then respects the tradition, tries to show that I've kind of paying homage to the past, things like that.
Let's turn a little bit to software engineering. So in this part of your life, you've worked on features at Google and Microsoft that millions of people use. How do you think your training in creative endeavors have helped you create software?
In a way, they're the same, right? They're both problem solving, right? The problem is like you're trying to make something and you don't know how it's done yet, or you don't know what you're supposed to do exactly. But then you start breaking down that problem into parts. And so you say, oh, okay, I know that if I want to make a car, I need to know how to make a wheel. I need to know how to make an engine. I need to know how to make whatever. And so when I was doing music, a lot of it was like reverse engineering. I was trying to figure out, what made the Miles Davis band sound good. And I realized, it's because, the drums are playing in a certain way. How do the drums play in this way? And then you keep asking questions over and over again, like kind of getting into the details of it. Why did the bass play it this way? Why did the piano play it this way? How is the trumpet interacting with the sax player? And these kinds of things, this kind of like inquisitive, like no detail left unturned thinking is kind of what got me through programming too, which is all about that.
In your work at tech companies, you've managed and mentored the next generation of engineers. How does this type of work feed you?
I love doing that stuff. I love feeling like I can empower other people and kind of teach people things that to not, and so that they can learn without, running into their own inhibitions. Oh, because a lot of times it's not just technical, right? It's also kind of like you're being a cheerleader to them, because they may not know like that, like they're capable of doing something. They may not even know like how to begin, right? And so like it's really rewarding to see people who just got out of college. Maybe they're too scared to ask questions, and at the end of the day, like they can't ask questions without feeling like they're dumb or something. I think that's a great feeling, because that's something that's going to help them not just for work but for life too. But yeah, it's great. That's my favorite part of work.
And how does mentorship show up for you in other ways, like music and magic, or even outside of what we've talked about today?
I've been on both sides of the mentorship side, I think. So for instance, the people I recorded with, like Ralph, Kenny, and Peter, like I still email them sometimes and ask them questions, and they'll still respond to me. Because of their generousness, I've kind of tried to do the same thing in my other endeavors. So for instance, I'm in the Discord group for there's like a jazz Discord group called Jazz Chord. I'm actually one of the admins in it, and I just basically answer any questions that kids, it's mostly high school kids have about jazz or about history, about anything like that. And I try to do the best I can to answer the questions. I even started teaching some of them like piano, kind of on the side. And it's been really rewarding to see them grow from when they started, which is not knowing anything, to kind of knowing a lot more than I did when I was their age.
Oh, that's wonderful. What do you think keeps you going with all of these pursuits?
I think I've always had a drive to do things well. I think I mentioned this earlier. And it really inspires me to hear anything done or see anything done well, whether it's magic, whether it's like a piece of code, whether it's music, whether it's anything. And that's kind of what I want, is I want like anything I do to be like a example of something done well. And then maybe it'll inspire someone else who's not necessarily a musician. Like maybe they go and, build something else like in their world that's really cool, because they're like, oh man, this person spent a lot of time, design details and make everything look right. I think that's what keeps me going, is I want to continue being inspiring.
It sounds like you really approach these like a craft, like music as a craft, magic as a craft, even engineering as a craft.
I like it as art too, but I think I definitely do lean towards the craft side of things.
Yeah. Through these interviews, we're co-creating the Ampersand Manifesto, Principles for Leading a Multi-Passionate Life. What do you think should be included in the manifesto?
What I would add is consistency. Let's say you're working out, right? You obviously you're not going to every day go to the gym for like 5 hours, but you can go to the gym every day for like 10 minutes, right? And I think just doing that, even if it's on the back burner, like just practicing scales on the piano for 10 minutes or something, just doing. Just like keeping the flame of your passion alive, even though like that day may not be, a good day, is really valuable. Just every day, do something.
Every day, do something. I love it. Charles, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Folks, you can follow Charles on Instagram at Charles Performs and stay tuned for his album this summer. And we'll link to that in the show notes. If you liked this show, hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow Ampersands. And if you're enjoying our show, please consider leaving a rating or a short review so that more people can find out about the show. I had a chance to listen back on my interview with Charles, and I wanted to share a few key takeaways. 1. His analogy of jazz being a shared language to how you might meet a new person was so great. I am still thinking about it. In my own experience, when I meet someone new, I try to look for connections and go beyond the surface level to find something that really matters to them. And there are so many topics that we all share. How and where we grew up, our experiences as a child or young adult, places in the world that we love. Jazz really is a fun way of thinking about all these improvisations of life as we make our way into the world. 2. Something that Charles and I have in common is our interest in being the gateway to new art forms, or new-to-you art forms. This seems to be a common theme with ampersands that I've talked to. Because of our ability to exist in 2 or more worlds, we are the ideal people to welcome others in. 3. I'm still marveling at the immense behind-the-scenes work that Charles did for his album, writing 100 songs and releasing just 4 of them. It makes me reflect on so many artists and creators and all the behind-the-music, preparation, practice, and mental fitness that needs to take place. I hope we get to hear some more of these songs someday.